I've got to say that I'm really excited tonight because I actually figured out what I did wrong the other night. And so now I'm happy to be talking to Warren Zanes. How are you, Warren? Oh, let's see here. I bet I did this wrong. I thought this would work. I can't hear you, so let's do this. There we go. Okay, now can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So how are you, Warren?
I'm doing well, thank you.
My,
End of a long day.
okay, my first question is, what kind of music did you play in the Del Fuegos?
What kind of music did we play? Really, it was pretty traditional rock and roll.
Right.
It
That
was
would be my thought.
born of the Rolling Stones, all that they listened to, and a little bit of what came after the Brian Jones years.
Yes. And what I would say is both you and your brother have made interesting careers that I would not have expected because your brother Dan made wonderful children's albums.
Yeah, actually, I would include the other Del Fuegos in that one too, because Tom and Woody both went on to do interesting things. We're a rare case in our good fortune to have second chapters,
Right.
to the man.
Well, definitely your second chapter has been writing. And so let's first talk about that awesome biography that you did of Tom Petty.
Yeah, well, after I left the Del Fuegos, I put 10 years into school. I'd never been to college, and
Right.
I went and I did 4 years of undergrad. Then I got 2 master's degrees, and then I got a PhD. And I
Wow.
put a lot of time into writing, but I
Right.
never stopped loving writing songs. I never stopped loving playing music. I wasn't right at the forefront of things, but the music was always there. So by the end of that process, when I had the PhD in hand, the two worlds started to weave themselves together,
Right.
and I went from a more strictly academic writing to writing about music. But I got to say, a lot of what I learned in the university setting, I brought into my writing. And
Right.
the first book that I wrote, and I really have Joe Pernice to thank for this.
Okay. Wonderful.
Joe brought me into the 33 and a third world
Right.
before it existed. And so we were in the first series, and that book fell into Tom Petty's hands.
Okay.
And, Tom Petty was somebody that I knew because the Del Fuegos did a 3-month tour with him.
Right.
He sang a harmony on one of our records, but more importantly, he was a hero from my preteen years. And
Right.
he read this book and ended up making contact with me, and it kind of opened this other door in our relationship that was really unexpected and really formative.
Yes. And I guess agreeing that book, I have to ask you, what about the dad? I mean, what about the bomb shelter? That dad was kind of crazy.
Well, there are a lot of important rock and rollers
Right.
who had less than perfect relationships with their fathers.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
And I think that's where a lot of ambition comes from. I think that's where that desire to have and cultivate a voice comes from.
Right.
And, along with it, the desire to, the I'll show him thing
Certainly.
it's, if you took that out of rock and roll, it would look very different.
Right. But I was just kind of stunned because the dad was very paranoid, and that was kind of an important point because it also seemed like that Tom was very emotional.
Uh, yeah, I mean, if you took that part out of the rock and roll, there wouldn't be much left to.
Yes.
Uh, when somebody discovers that they have the opportunity to write songs and then they can actually do it,
Right.
a world opens up
Right.
where they suddenly have a place to take their emotions, to take their feelings born of unrequited love, to take their feelings born of, a father who was, often less than kind.
Right.
And it's, man, once you find that, it changes lives. And I think
Right.
that framework fits Petty's life.
Well, I guess that is a really good book, and it was actually written before he died, and that's so fun that you got to actually spend that time with him.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky in that regard.
Good timing, definitely.
Yeah, and it came out 2 years before his passing, and the amazing thing for me personally was that I had this first period of knowing him just being the guy in the opening band.
Right.
And then I go off and I do all this school, and I felt like I was the same person, but I think he viewed me as, having read my Dusty in Memphis book, I think he viewed me somewhat differently. And to have someone you admire that much see change in you is really a very heavy experience.
Yes, I'm sure that is.
So, he was a real gift to me. I learned a lot from him, and he gave me a lot of space to, find my voice.
Right. But now, tell me about this amazing movie that I didn't even know existed about Johnny Cash and how you were involved in that.
Well, that's a movie directed by Tom Zimney.
Right.
And Tom has directed a number of films for Bruce Springsteen. He made an amazing HBO Elvis movie called The Searcher.
Right.
I think where he first made his mark, and I could be wrong on this, was editing The Wire.
Right.
So he's got an amazing history in film, and we were put together on a kind of blind date for a project that never came into being.
Okay, what was that?
The director and me as a writer.
Okay, what was that project?
That was it was an early rock and roll project.
Okay.
And it was really about the, like 54 to 58.
Okay.
And what was happening then and what happened to the early rock and rollers when the British invasion came.
Right.
And then, so it was a deep story. It was really one of those big, more epic scale American story. And, like many projects, if the financing doesn't come, nobody knows it happened. But for me, I came out with this friendship with Tom.
Right.
And, we ended up, in one another's lives. And when the Johnny Cash project came, it was one that, he reached out to me. I wrote a treatment. The financing did come. And more importantly, the involvement of
the family,
the members of the family.
Yes.
And that's when you have what you need. When the people who knew and loved the man show up for the project, it's got some teeth.
Right. Because I was just so amazed because so many of my friends are diehard Johnny Cash fans, and we never even heard of this thing. And it was so cool to get to introduce people to what a wonderful movie it is. And so much footage is great.
Yeah. And I like the way Tom put Folsom Prison as a kind of quilting point in the
Yes.
film. But you know, like I was saying about Tom Petty, I think Johnny Cash was the same. Like he
Oh, no doubt.
discovered that he could take his emotional life into this world where songs are born, and he spent a lot of time there. The most striking thing to me was how at the end of his life he was just writing and writing and writing.
Absolutely.
Kept going after the song.
And, you know, again, I mean, the Rick Rubin thing, it was just all so amazing. And so I really just have to say that everyone who likes Johnny Cash needs to find this film, because if I haven't known about it, that's really hard for me to believe. But how much did you know about Johnny before starting this?
I'd read a few books. I knew the music, knew the music pretty well, but it's
Right.
a very deep catalog, obviously.
It certainly is.
I hadn't seen a lot of the Johnny Cash television shows.
Right.
So he left so much behind that there was an educational component for sure. So I felt like I knew the guy, but with any project, you come out the other side with a deeper understanding. I mean,
Right.
for me as a professor, it's the same thing. If I teach a class and I don't come out the other side of that class with a deeper understanding of whatever I was talking about,
Right.
I did it wrong.
Yes. Well, but again, the thing that, impresses me so much about Johnny Cash was those mid-60s albums that nobody's even heard of, like all the Bitter Tears and all those things. He was so rock and roll. He was absolutely just had the biggest spirit and the biggest things going on, that really that period was to be what defined him.
Well, yeah, it's a very, very impressive the way he kept looking at the album, the LP, and going,
or anybody else.
What else can I do with this? I mean, the Beatles get credit for doing that,
Right.
and they should. But there was Johnny Cash, this artist kind of over here, generally associated with country,
right.
and no less insistent on asking what else can an album be.
Yes. Mr. Garfield, I mean, just all these songs that they're just American history. They're everything. That's the thing. And not kind of whitewashed American history. I mean, the Bitter Tears thing. I mean, there's so much amazing stuff. He was such a poet.
Well, he was also very politicized.
Yes, absolutely.
And people think that if country music is politicized, it's to the right.
Right.
And he's contrary to a lot of received opinions. I think the other thing that should happen with that film is that people see country music itself in a deep way.
Yes. And my dad was a big Johnny Cash fan, and I think that he had different political opinions than Johnny did, but he had amazing love for the music and taught me so much about that. And that's what's so fun, because I interviewed Carlene Carter last week. We're just having so much fun. But I love this movie, and everybody needs to see it. And I think for whatever reason, a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, we are in the golden age of documentaries right now, and there's a lot of product out there. But I don't have an objective position, but I'll say I agree with you. Everybody should see it.
It's really good. What's your next project? What's going on next?
Well, nothing that I can. I'm trying to think. Nothing that I can speak freely about. I am in the middle of a book, but it hasn't been announced. So I'm quite a ways through it, and it should come this year.
Oh, wow.
So I'm excited about that.
Right.
There are a couple film things that are percolating, but I'm too old to think that they'll all happen, but I hope they do. And then I'm always teaching. So I teach at NYU a class a semester, and and I'm often writing songs, and I've got it in my head that I work a lot with Brad Jones in Nashville, and I reached out to Brad during the pandemic, and I said, I think I finally figured out the way to get the idea of a double album out of my head. I said, I want to make a triple album.
Okay.
And he said, let's do it. So I've been writing a lot.
That's fun.
Too. And so, I'm very lucky in that I've got this hybridity, a kind of active hybridity.
Right.
Not all of it puts food on the table. Making music sure doesn't. But they all kind of cross fertilize. So the music matters to the writing matters to the film work. It all matters to the teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm raising a couple of sons, and I like to think it matters for them too.
I'm sure it does. But
we could bring them in, and they may tell us otherwise.
What's the kids like? What are your kids like?
Well, I'll tell you, it's 95%. I may be overstating, but for years it's been almost exclusively musical theater.
Really? Oh yes, my kids are like that too. My daughter is the hugest fan of the Hamilton and the all the stuff.
Yeah, I was on a panel of rock writers, and the subject came up of technology. Someone was making the point that technology has gotten us to the point where it's much easier to make a pretty good record.
Right.
A lot of people are making pretty good records.
Yes.
And people who grew up in the 60s grew up during this kind of Renaissance period. Right. And the Beatles were happening. And, as a dad, I had to kind of raise my hand and say, if you look for the Beatles to happen in exactly the same place they happened before, it's not going to be like that. And
right.
And my point was that I think that there was a Beatles for that moment, and it was Hamilton.
Right, exactly.
Because I was taking my kids in to stand at the stage door.
Oh, yeah.
The cast came out, and my son fainted. I'm like, well, he may be the only one fainting,
all these things. It's just a different time. But you're right. That's what the kids are listening to now.
I mean, nobody fainted at a Del Fuego's show. I mean, some people vomited, but that's about it. That wasn't because of us, I hope.
Well, that's so fun. And so I really am now excited to hear about this book, whatever it is, that you'll have to come back on.
When
you
can
announce it.
Yeah, I would be, more than happy to do that. It's funny. It's like one thing I really like about the writing is that it's immersive.
Right.
So the experience with the Petty book, it was immersive, and there he was going through the process with me, and
right.
When it's all working like that, it's pinch yourself kind of magic, and
yes.
So I hope I get to keep on writing.
Well, that is fun, and thank you so much for spending time with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Talk to you later. Okay, now let's see here. Here we are. And